so many different facets of your own personality that you can get to, and you find yourself repeating yourself.
It was the blazing summer of 2008 in Westport, Connecticut. Inside his quiet mansion, Paul Newman, the golden legend of Hollywood itself, lay in bed, fighting through the ache that came and went like clockwork every afternoon. Near his pillow sat an old Panasonic tape recorder, but this wasn't for memoirs or some polished documentary. No, this was something raw, something real. It was his confession, one that would leave Hollywood gasping. No one could have imagined what was about to come out of that machine. 6 hidden love affairs, all with famous men from the golden age of cinema. He spoke about nights filled with whispered promises, stolen glances, and love letters that could destroy reputations overnight. One lover once held Paul's hand in the dark, vowing to love him forever, only to sell his words to a tabloid the very next morning for a fat payday. Another one secretly taped every private talk they had, using those recordings as a weapon. He warned, "If you ever speak out, they'll call you crazy, Paul." The betrayal was ice cold. So who were these men? And why did Paul Newman carry this secret to his dying breath? The first name that echoed through that recording, none other than Marlon Brando, a name that dripped with desire, chaos, and heartbreak. Their story began back in 1961 at a charity gala at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. Paul arrived beside his wife, Joanne Woodward, looking sharp and calm as always. Then Brando walked in, late, rumpled shirt, half smirk, eyes full of mischief and danger. He didn't just enter the room, he took it, and before long, he was standing right behind Paul. When he finally spoke, Brando said, "I thought you'd be as boring as the papers made you out." He paused, flashed that grin, and added, "Turns out you're the only one here who isn't pretending." That one moment changed everything. For the first time, Paul, the man who never fell for empty flattery, didn't walk away. Soon came the quiet coffees in Westwood, the midnight walks around Silver Lake, even sudden secret flights to Palm Springs that nobody else knew about. Something electric grew between them, something neither could define. Paul fell hard, loving with every inch of his soul. But Brando played by different rules. To him, love was another performance, another mask to wear. In one tape dated August 3rd, 2008, Paul's voice cracked as he said, "He would pull me out of my world, drop me into rooms full of strangers, faces I couldn't read, and eyes I couldn't control." Those mysterious meetings Brando dragged him to often took place in shadowy mansions, hidden in Laurel Canyon, or rented beach houses in Venice. Directors, producers, journalists, all sipping champagne, whispering promises about new movies, awards, and fame. At first, Paul thought it was all harmless networking, but soon he saw the truth. Those nights weren't about art or opportunity. They were rehearsals for manipulation, power, and control. Brando was always the director of his own stage, and Paul, just another actor in the background. Every scene was crafted to keep all eyes on Marlon, while Paul stood quietly in the shadows, useful only when it helped Brando's next big publicity move. But the real twist came when Brando himself leaked Paul's private letters, soft, trusting, handwritten words that were never meant to see the light of day. He handed them straight to photographer Mark Weller, a slick tabloid stringer who fed stories to the Los Angeles Mirror. Then, out of nowhere, in 1965, that very paper dropped a scandalous anonymous column titled "Love Behind the Lens." It talked about a world-famous actor, a Venice Award winner, torn between a perfect family life and a secret affair with a dark-haired screen legend. Hollywood insiders didn't need to guess twice. Everyone knew it was Paul. But Paul had no clue that the man who betrayed him, the one who slid that envelope across the newspaper's front desk, was Marlon himself. Why would Brando do it? Because he needed a spark, a scandal to remind the world he was still the most talked-about man in show business. He wanted the cameras flashing again, the headlines screaming his name. Old photos, old flames, old drama, anything to keep Marlon Brando alive in the press. And poor Paul, who had loved him quietly and fiercely, became the sacrifice for Brando's hunger to stay relevant. The heartbreak cut even deeper when Joanne, Paul's loyal wife, stumbled upon one of those exposed letters hidden inside a bookshelf drawer. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. Instead, she left a small handwritten note on his desk that said, "If you need a place to take shelter, I'm still here. But if you need one more lie, I'm not the person who can help you. That one line broke him. That winter in Connecticut felt endless. Paul barely stepped outside for weeks. His daughter, Nell Newman, later said it was the time when her father would quietly slip out to the back porch in the middle of the night, standing there in the freezing air, smoking until his hands went numb. No one dared to ask what was wrong, but everyone already knew. In one of his final tape recordings, Paul's voice trembled as he confessed, "I used to believe that if I was patient enough, if I loved him long enough, I could make him change. But Brando never changed. He only knew how to turn real feelings into tools for survival. And I let him turn me into one of those tools, even when I knew I didn't deserve it." Then his voice faded into a whisper. "I loved him in a way no one should ever love anyone." The story between Paul and Brando didn't explode in a dramatic breakup. It dissolved into silence. Paul stopped answering calls, stopped writing letters, and stopped believing that love could ever fix someone like Brando. But what lingered was the regret, and not everyone who hurt Paul simply disappeared from his life. By the early 1970s, Paul Newman was 44, settled in Connecticut with his wife Joanne Woodward, a picture-perfect Hollywood couple. Meanwhile, Robert Redford, just 32, was married to Lola Van Wagenen and a proud father of 3, 2 family men, 2 cinematic legends. Yet between them sparked something that no script could explain. It wasn't loud or obvious, but a quiet, magnetic pull that neither could ignore. During filming, they found excuses to be near each other, lingering over cast dinners, standing shoulder to shoulder during long rehearsals, stealing glances that lasted just a little too long. It wasn't what they said that gave them away, but what they didn't say. There was tension, gentle, dangerous, and electric. Dennis Corbin, a lighting crew member, once recalled a night in Springdale, Utah, while the cast stayed at a small lodge. "It was midnight," he said. "I saw Paul standing outside Redford's balcony, cigarette in hand, eyes red like he hadn't slept. I didn't ask anything, but I saw Robert open the door, pull him inside, and then they were gone. That quiet moment said everything, and it wouldn't be the last." From 1970 through the early 1980s, they lived like reflections. Icons by day, shadows by night, legendary co-stars on set, hidden lovers off camera. But there was heartbreak built into the script of their lives, because only one of them truly believed the love was real. The other just wanted to bury it under fame and denial. In one tape dated July 14, 2008, Paul's voice cracked with raw honesty. "We both had wives, children, reputations," he said. "But I loved him with a kind of feeling that didn't fit any pattern. I thought if I waited long enough, there'd come a day he'd hold my hand in the daylight, the way he held it in the dark. That day never came." By 1976, Paul had reached his breaking point. He wanted to tell the truth, not for fame, not for revenge, but for peace. He arranged to meet Stephen Klaus, a respected journalist from The New Yorker, at the Algonquin Hotel in Manhattan. But just hours before the meeting, the phone rang. On the line was Redford's representative, cold and blunt. "If you utter one word about it, you'll lose everything." That same night, Klaus's office received an anonymous fax packed with accusations, claims that Paul Newman was mentally unstable, hooked on pills and alcohol, and had once shoved a female assistant while drunk. Total sabotage. The interview was scrapped instantly. Paul's career, once unstoppable, suddenly slowed, for reasons no one in Hollywood dared to explain. Weeks later, a small Palm Springs tabloid, the Daily Star, printed a cruel piece claiming that a veteran actor has been shunned by a former co-star due to signs of violence and emotional instability. They didn't need to print names. Everyone already knew who they meant. And Robert Redford, the same man Paul had guided, supported, and called a brother, stayed silent, completely silent. At the 1980 BAFTA Awards, a BBC reporter asked him directly, "Do you still keep in touch with Paul?" Redford smiled faintly and said, "We made something great together, but everyone has to move on." That calm answer hit like a knife. The world saw composure, but Paul saw a final goodbye wrapped in cold indifference. And from that moment on, whatever they once had, friendship, love, or something unspoken in between, vanished under the weight of silence and shame. Redford's calm words at the BAFTAs echoed long after the cameras shut off. He turned away, not waiting for another question, just walked off like it meant nothing. That same night, Paul went home, sat by the dim light of his study, and opened his worn-out journal. With shaky hands, he wrote a single, heartbreaking line. "The man who once called me his light now uses me as his shadow to protect his image. He didn't just deny me, he broke the real part of me, the part I never dared to show the world." That love story didn't end with a fight or a clean break. It ended in a silence so deliberate, it was practically scripted, a silence that lasted all the way to the grave. People thought Redford was the last of Paul's heartbreaks, but they were wrong. There was still one more chapter, and this one burned hotter than all the rest. The next name Paul whispered into that recorder was a shocker. A young man, just 24, wild, magnetic, and untamed. A spirit that America fell in love with and lost too soon. You guessed it, Steve McQueen. When Paul spoke his name, his voice changed, like each word was dipped in pain and fury. "Steve McQueen, that bastard," he muttered, every syllable heavy with betrayal. It wasn't just about one cruel act or some cutting remark. No, this was anger that had fermented over years. Years of manipulation, power games, and a love that burned too bright to survive. Their story began way back in 1956, backstage at the Photoplay Awards. Paul was already a married man, respected, composed, the classic Hollywood gentleman. Steve, on the other hand, was a fiery newcomer, still hustling through TV roles, hungry for fame and recognition. But when Steve's eyes met Paul's that night, something electric sparked. The way Steve looked at him, bold, defiant, a little dangerous, made it impossible for Paul to look away. What started as a few stolen moments soon turned into secret meetings that stretched late into the night at the iconic Chateau Marmont Hotel. Behind closed doors, their chemistry was uncontrollable. Half passion, half destruction. In one of his tapes, Paul said quietly, "I used to believe he loved me, but then I realized he just needed to prove that even Newman could be his to own." Those words cut deep. By 1962, the tabloids caught the scent of scandal. Confidential magazine dropped a rumor that Steve McQueen had an unusually close relationship with a male actor in New York, and the whispers spread fast. Steve's reaction? Swift and cold. Within a week, he made sure to be photographed holding hands with Anne Margaret at the War Lover premiere. Hollywood saw the perfect couple, but behind the scenes, the truth was darker. Around that same time, Paul received an envelope from Steve's lawyer. Inside was a non-disclosure agreement, cold as steel. When they met to talk, Steve leaned in close, voice low and threatening. "You know what happens to people who get exposed, don't you? You've got a family. You've got a daughter. Don't let it all come crashing down just because you're too weak." Those were Steve McQueen's words, sharp, cold, and meant to wound. He didn't just threaten Paul. He buried every trace of what they had under piles of cash, legal paperwork, and secret backroom deals. He used his fame like a shield and his influence like a weapon. One day, Paul stumbled across something that made his blood run cold. A payment of over $15,000 from Steve to an editor at Variety. The message behind it was crystal clear. Never again mention Paul Newman's name in the investigative piece that was about to drop. Steve wasn't just protecting his own image, he was erasing Paul's existence from his story entirely. But the cruelest strike came later, on national television. In 1965, during an interview on The Merv Griffin Show, Steve flashed that smug grin when the host asked about rumors that a male admirer had once been obsessed with him. Steve chuckled and said, "I don't remember his name. Probably just some overzealous fan. The kind who sends love letters and knocks on my door in the middle of the night. Pretty creepy, really." That line hit Paul like a sledgehammer. He heard it, and he understood exactly what Steve was doing. He wasn't just erasing the past. He was setting it on fire and then making Paul choke on the ashes. Years later, during the filming of The Towering Inferno in 1973, they crossed paths backstage. Paul finally broke his silence, shouting, "Why did you turn me into a madman in front of the whole world?" Steve didn't flinch. He just laughed, that cold, careless laugh. Opened a drawer and tossed a small cassette tape onto the table. "Just a precaution," he said with a smirk. "If you ever say something you shouldn't, I've got the evidence to answer every word." That's when Paul realized the horrifying truth. Steve had recorded everything. Every whispered confession, every fight, every tear-soaked apology, every private moment they'd ever shared. He'd turned their love into a weapon, locking it all away like an arsenal ready to explode if Paul ever dared to speak. When Steve married Ally McGraw later that same year, Paul didn't say a word publicly. No confrontation, no headlines. But a few days after the wedding, a small brown package arrived at Steve's mansion. Inside was a single torn shirt, the same one Steve had worn during a drunken night years earlier at Paul's cabin in Vermont. The fabric was still stained with blood, smelled faintly of liquor, and carried smudged lipstick marks that hadn't faded. It wasn't a gift, it was a message, the final warning. In one of his later recordings, Paul's voice cracked as he said, "He used love like a knife. Every embrace was another cut, and yet I still couldn't stop coming back. I still loved him, even when I knew he'd be the one to destroy me if I let him any closer." After the chaos, Paul Newman thought peace had finally found him, but peace came wearing a familiar face. The next man to step into his life was the gentle opposite of Steve McQueen, calm, thoughtful, and quietly magnetic. Robert Redford. For a while, it felt like breathing again, like maybe love didn't always have to hurt. But even that tender chapter would close in betrayal. And then came the story that cut deeper than them all, the one Paul never stopped mourning, James Dean, the wild heart of Hollywood, the boy who lived fast, loved hard, and vanished too soon. For Paul, James wasn't the most scandalous love of his life, but he was the one who left the deepest scar, the kind that never fades, even when everything else does. Their story started in the spring of 1955, inside the cold, echoing studios of Warner Brothers. Paul, then 30, was filming Somebody Up There Likes Me, while James, just 24, had skyrocketed to fame after East of Eden. On paper, they were supposed to be rivals, two rising stars fighting for the same spotlight. But the first time James looked at Paul, there was no jealousy in his eyes, just pure fascination. And when he smiled, that single smile kept Paul awake for 3 nights straight. From that moment, they became inseparable, two souls circling each other like they'd been waiting for a lifetime to meet. Sometimes they'd sit in the corner of an all-night diner along Ventura Boulevard, talking until sunrise. Other nights, they'd speed through empty roads in James's silver Porsche 550, wind roaring past like a secret song only they could hear. There were quiet afternoons in a small wooden cabin in Ojai, lying side by side, listening to old jazz records, pretending to rehearse lines. But everyone knew those lines were really love letters in disguise. They didn't need to say the words aloud. The silence between them said enough. One rainy night, after the Rebel Without a Cause premiere, James turned to Paul with that haunted look in his eyes and said, "I don't need anyone to understand me. I just need you not to pretend when you're with me." Paul didn't answer. He just took James's hand and pressed it against his chest, right over his pounding heart. But beautiful things never last long. Not in Hollywood, not for them. That June, an unknown paparazzo named Eddie Prescott snapped a forbidden moment, a photograph of Paul and James sharing a kiss inside a parked car near Sunset Strip. No paper dared to print it outright, but everyone in town knew what that image meant. Days later, the Los Angeles Herald-Express ran a cryptic gossip piece titled "Shadow Lovers of the Silver Screen." It never named names, but the entire industry whispered the same 2 words, James Dean. Within a week, Warner Brothers pulled him from his promotional contract. Just like that, erased from posters, interviews, and press tours. For Paul, that was the night innocence died. That one photo, that one quiet moment of truth, had set off a storm that would haunt him for decades. And though James's life would soon end in tragedy, the memory of that stolen love, raw, fragile, and pure, stayed with Paul until his very last breath. After the gossip storm hit, Paul's life began to crumble piece by piece. The fallout was immediate. He lost a coveted role in a George Stevens project overnight. But the rejection wasn't the worst part. It was the whispers, the sideways looks, and the icy judgment from the very people who had once praised him. One studio executive even faxed him directly with a cruel warning. "If you don't want to sink like Montgomery Clift, you'd better teach your wife how to hold your hand in public." That single line said everything about Hollywood's hypocrisy, Meanwhile, James Dean was falling apart. The fearless rebel of the screen became a shadow of himself, avoiding calls, ignoring letters, and shutting everyone out. Paul tried to reach him over and over again. One night, he drove to James's home, stood at the door, and knocked for hours in the dark. No one answered, but wedged in the doorframe was a single note written in trembling handwriting. "I don't deserve to live if living in your eyes is wrong." Those words would haunt Paul for the rest of his life. 3 days later, James was found unconscious after an overdose of sleeping pills. He survived, barely, but the press treated him like a punchline instead of a person. Daily Variety splashed headlines reading, "Young actor suffers severe emotional disturbance," and one cold-hearted columnist at the New York Post wrote, "James Dean should learn to be a man before trying to be an idol." The cruelty was merciless. Paul was shattered. He was stuck between two impossible worlds. One was the Hollywood empire he'd built with his wife, Joanne Woodward, and the other was a love that was slowly bleeding to death. He wanted to save James, but he didn't know how to do it without destroying them both. Then came the message that would mark the end of everything. It was September 1955. A telegram from James read, "Mexico City, Friday. If you don't come, I'll understand." Simple words, but they carried the weight of a goodbye. Paul had a plane ticket ready. He was in New York at the time, preparing for a Life magazine photo shoot with Joanne. He even made it to LaGuardia Airport, standing right there at the gate, ticket in hand. But he turned back, fear, weakness, the crushing instinct to protect everything he'd built instead of everyone he'd loved. Then, on September 30th, 1955, tragedy struck. James Dean died in a fiery car crash near Cholame, California. The news broke over CBS Radio's 8 p.m. broadcast. Paul was sitting in the living room of the Plaza Hotel when he heard it, the words echoing from the radio like a sentence he'd been waiting to hear but never wanted to face. He didn't cry. He didn't move. For 3 days, he didn't eat, didn't sleep. In a summer 2008 recording, Paul's aged voice trembled as he remembered, "I sat looking at my hands. They didn't shake, not a tear. Only one question kept repeating in my head. Why didn't I get on that plane? If I'd gone that day, would he still be alive?" From that night on, Paul Newman never spoke James Dean's name again in public. But family members noticed something strange. Whenever Paul drank too much, he'd tilt his head toward the ceiling and whisper softly, "I'm sorry, you should have lived a brilliant life." All that remained from their last trip together to Ojai was a single keepsake, a quiet memory wrapped in heartbreak. And then came Sal Mineo, the next chapter in Paul Newman's secret life, a young love strangled by the weight of prejudice and fear. By then, Paul was a man barely holding himself together. On the outside, he still looked flawless, the polished gentleman, the devoted husband, America's golden star. But inside, he was wrecked. After Steve, after Brando, after Redford, he'd fallen into a dark pit of self-loathing he couldn't climb out of. The man who once loved in silence now lived in suspicion, seeing deceit and manipulation everywhere he looked. In September 1974, Joanne, who'd always carried her pain in silence, quietly suggested he see someone. She found a discreet psychologist in West Hollywood, someone who could help without the tabloids sniffing around. Paul walked in one gray, rainy afternoon and barely said a word. "I'm so tired," he murmured. "I need somewhere I can breathe." That's when fate stepped in, and Sal Mineo walked through the door. The rain outside blurred against the window like smoke, and there he was, smaller, softer, but carrying an unspoken sadness in his eyes. Sal had long stepped away from the spotlight since Rebel Without a Cause. Once hailed as the second James Dean, he carried that same tragedy too. Too vulnerable, too emotional, too real for the ruthless machine of Hollywood. The rumors about his sexuality had crushed his career before it even had the chance to bloom. When they met, Paul asked gently, "You're in treatment too?" Sal nodded, tapping his temple with a faint smile. "Not to cure an illness, but to cure what they made me believe was an illness." From that day forward, the two began taking long walks together after therapy sessions. No hugs, no stolen kisses, no games. just two lonely men trying to learn how to breathe again in a world that didn't know what compassion meant. Sal once scribbled something on a scrap of paper and slipped it quietly into Paul's jacket pocket. When Paul found it later, it read, "If they call you a freak, then let me be a freak with you." That simple line said everything. Love came softly this time, not wild or reckless like with Steve, not intense and stormy like with Brando. It came in whispers, in glances, in quiet moments that didn't need to prove anything. Every morning, Paul would find a handwritten note slipped under his door. Sal's handwriting was always neat and tender. "Did you sleep well? I often wonder, if one day you woke up and I was gone, would you come looking for me?" Those notes became Paul's lifeline, small reminders that he wasn't completely alone in the world. In one of his later tapes, Paul admitted, "Sal was the first person who made me feel like I didn't have to hide who I was. When I was with him, I forgot I was Paul Newman." They began to dream again, quietly, carefully. Venice was supposed to be next. Spring of 1976, a trip they both promised would be their first escape, where they could finally walk side by side without fear. Sal Mineo had been dreaming again, finally ready to write his own story. He wanted to create a screenplay for the two of them, a poetic tragedy about two men finding each other in a city slowly drowning beneath floodwaters. It was meant to be their story, told without shame, without secrets. But that dream would never come true. On the night of February 12, 1976, tragedy struck. Sal was stabbed to death outside his apartment in West Hollywood, just steps away from his front door, moments after leaving a theater rehearsal for the play, P.S. Your Cat is Dead. The killer was a young stranger. Police quickly labeled it a robbery gone wrong, but Paul knew better. Deep down, he knew it was the cruel price of being a man who dared to live and love truthfully in a world that punished honesty. When Paul heard the news, he didn't speak for 3 whole days. No calls, no tears. He just sat on the roof of his house, staring at the glittering sprawl of Los Angeles, the city that had given him everything and taken even more. Later, in one of his final recordings, his voice cracked as he said, "I used to think I was the one healing him, but it was Sal who pulled me out of the abyss. He never needed anything from me, except for me to dare to be myself. And I never got the chance to say thank you." But fate wasn't done with Paul Newman yet, because what came next would test the last piece of his heart, Montgomery Clift, the final love and the pain that could never be spoken aloud. Paul once said, "I thought nothing in this world could destroy me until the day Joanne stood in front of me, her hands trembling, holding the letter she found under my pillow." It was a handwritten note from Monty, written in blue ink, the elegant, slanted script signed Montgomery Clift. When Joanne read it, her eyes shattered, not with anger, but with heartbreak too deep for words. It all began back in 1966, while Paul was filming Hombre in Tucson, Arizona. Out of nowhere, Joanne arrived unannounced on set, holding a torn-open envelope. There were no accusations, no shouting, just one icy, quiet sentence. "So this is why you haven't slept for the past 2 years." For years, Monty and Paul had shared a connection far beyond friendship, something tender, tragic, and impossible to define. After every secret meeting, Monty would send Paul letters, quiet confessions written from a place of aching loneliness. They weren't love letters in the usual sense. They were filled with sorrow, longing, and guilt. One of them read, "I don't need you to choose me. I only ask that you don't deny my existence." Joanne had read them all, every single one. Then came the worst blow of all. One of those letters fell into the wrong hands. A wardrobe assistant accidentally found it and sold it to Clara Jenkins, a gossip reporter from the National Enquirer. By November 1966, the secret was out, and Hollywood erupted like wildfire. Headlines screamed across newsstands, "Paul Newman and Monty Clift, the buried truth." Paparazzi swarmed his home. Studio executives panicked. 20th Century Fox issued Paul a formal demand for an immediate clarification regarding extramarital activities that may damage the studio's commercial image. Within 48 hours, Joanne packed her bags and left their home. No dramatic fight, no public scene, just silence. The same silence that had followed Paul through every heartbreak of his life. For a man who had spent decades perfecting the image of Hollywood's ideal husband and father, it all came crashing down. and once again, Paul found himself standing in the ruins of love. This time knowing that even the purest connections could be twisted, leaked, and sold to the highest bidder. When Joanne left, she didn't shout or cry. She didn't even say goodbye. She simply placed a single folded note on Paul's pillow. Inside, one devastating line. "If you choose to live in lies, at least don't drag me down with you." Those words crushed him. It wasn't the exposure that broke Paul. It was the realization that he'd failed everyone: Joanne, Monty, and himself. A few days later, the phone rang. It was Monty calling from New York. His voice was tired, soft, but steady. "I'm sorry, Paul, but I can't do this anymore. I don't want to live like a shadow. I don't want to be your secret." Those words sliced through him like glass. Paul begged him to fly to Los Angeles, promised to move out, to start fresh. Even said he'd go public if that's what it took. But Monty just sighed and said, "No, I've been a ghost long enough." Less than a month later, on January 23, 1967, Paul got another call, this time from actor Kevin McCarthy, Monty's closest friend. Kevin's voice shook. "Monty's in the hospital. He swallowed a handful of sleeping pills. They saved him, but he doesn't want to see anyone, especially you." Paul collapsed. That phone call ended what little fight he had left. Within 4 weeks, his entire world had fallen apart. His wife gone, his lover gone, his reputation in ruins, the press tearing him apart, and Cool Hand Luke, his biggest project yet, delayed for personal reasons. Universal Studios even hit him with a $1.2 million lawsuit for breach of moral image. It was a staggering amount for the time, and it broke him completely. Unable to face the cameras, the questions, or even his own reflection, Paul quietly checked himself into a psychiatric recovery center in the quiet suburbs of Connecticut under a false name. His official file listed the diagnosis as severe anxiety disorder following emotional trauma and nervous exhaustion, accompanied by self-denial. No one knew, not the press, not the public. He paid his lawyers and media handlers a fortune to erase every trace of that stay. But decades later, fragments of his doctor's notes surfaced from the private diary of psychiatrist Dr. Richard Hale. One haunting line stood out: "He doesn't want to live, but he doesn't dare to die. It is the most terrifying state I have ever witnessed." Those words painted a portrait of a man destroyed from the inside out, a man who had spent his life hiding behind perfection until the mask itself became unbearable. Monty didn't wait for him to heal. He couldn't. 9 years later, on a cold February night in 1976, Montgomery Clift was found dead in his West Hollywood apartment, a fatal heart attack that came right after a phone call ending in a scream. No one ever confirmed who he'd been speaking to, but Paul believed deep down that Monty had been trying to reach him one last time. In one of Paul's final tape recordings, his voice broke as he whispered, "He was gone, and I just kept living. Trapped forever in the moment I didn't take his hand. I thought I was strong, but in the end, I was only a coward who knew how to love." And then, the tape stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It carried decades of grief, guilt, and memories that Paul could never erase. For all the lights, fame, and legend attached to his name, the man behind it all was haunted by the same question to his dying day. What if I had just been brave enough to love in the open? Not another word followed. And maybe that's what made it the most haunting piece of Paul Newman's entire story. A man who carried a doomed love in silence for half a century, finally daring to speak it aloud only when his life was measured in weeks, not years. When Paul Newman passed away, he took with him reels of secret tapes, recordings that the public has never heard. Inside them were names, confessions, and heartbreaks, all buried deep beneath the golden glow of Hollywood. A world that sparkled with glamour on the outside, but hid endless layers of deception underneath. Each tape was a confession, stories of love that couldn't exist in the open, pain that couldn't be shared, and truth that no studio would ever dare to print. These weren't the words of a movie star. They were the final whispers of a man who had loved too deeply, lost too often, and still couldn't stop searching for meaning in it all. Paul once said, "I don't tell this story to be forgiven. I tell it so that I won't be forgotten." And now, decades later, you're the one listening. hearing the echoes of his final confessions, piecing together the puzzle of a heart that refused to stop beating, even when it was breaking. But the question still lingers. How much of this story is truth, and how much is the echo of a soul counting down its final breaths? Was it all real, or was it Paul's last attempt to turn his pain into something beautiful before he disappeared forever? What do you believe? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your take on this haunting story. And if you were moved by this deep dive into the secret life of Paul Newman, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. We've got more untold Hollywood stories, more truth hiding behind the spotlight, and you won't want to miss a single one. See you in the next video.